thank you so much for joining. Uh, Today, we are going to be discussing a very important and unique topic related to clinical trials, financial toxicity, and understanding some aspects of phase one trials. We're lucky to be joined by two very important people with certain important expertise, and hopefully we'll have a very interesting discussion and a productive discussion regarding this topic. My name is Dr. Rafeh Naqash. I am an investigational cancer therapeutics fellow at the National Cancer Institute. I am interested in drug development, early phase clinical trials, and biomarker discovery. I will soon be joining faculty at the University of Oklahoma, so pretty excited about that. I should say before I start that none of my views here represent the views, do not necessarily represent the views of the National Cancer Institute or the US government. Next, I'll be introducing two of our panelists. First, I'll introduce Ms. Ivy Elkins. Ms. Elkins is one of our phenomenal and inspirational lung cancer patient advocates. She is a co-founder, one of the co-founders of the EGFR resistors lung cancer patient group, which is very well known on Twitter and other social media platforms. She has been living with stage 4 EGFR positive lung cancer for more than 7 years and is currently NED, which means does not have active disease, which is amazing. Next, I'll introduce Dr. Fumiko Chino. Dr. Chino is a cancer researcher and an assistant attending in radiation oncology at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. She's also the director at the Costs of Care Group, a global NGO focused on affordability in healthcare. Her research is focused on the financial toxicity of cancer, healthcare disparities, and access. She has been covered by national news media outlets such as the New York Times, Forbes, NPR, US News, and also has spoken across the US and internationally on the cost of cancer care. I'm going to give Ms. Elkins the stage, who will be driving our discussion and asking us questions relevant to the topic, and we'll try our best to answer as appropriately as possible. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. You know, I talk to a lot of patients in my work as a patient advocate, and there are many questions about clinical trials. I think one of the most confusing things is the different phases of clinical trials and what, you know, they all mean. Can we talk a little bit about what the phases are of clinical trials and how they're different from each other?
Definitely. Thank you so much for that question, Ms. Elkins. So briefly, phase one trials, so there's 3 different phases of trials, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And there are phase 0 trials as well, but we won't go into those details. For this topic today, I'll briefly discuss phase 1, 2, and 3 trials. So phase 1 trials are the first time a novel agent is tested in human beings. And there are certain rules regarding how these tests are done. Primarily, the phase 1 trial is based around understanding the safety, tolerability, and the toxicity of a drug. And there are certain rules, as I mentioned, of how a drug dose is determined in a phase 1 trials. There's different designs to how dose escalation, meaning how a certain drug goes from a lower dose to a certain higher dose, is performed in a phase 1 trial to determine what drug dose is appropriate based on patient safety and patient tolerability. There's also certain different assessments done in a phase 1 trials. One is called pharmacokinetics, which is how the drug is metabolized by the body, and the other one is called pharmacodynamics, which is the physiological effect of the drug on the tumor. So based on the pharmacokinetics and the pharmacodynamics, the drug dose is calculated. For example, for immunotherapeutic agents or targeted agents, for example, agents that target EGFR mutations or ALK mutations in lung cancer, different rules are followed, and sometimes the dose of the drug is not necessarily started from the lowest dose to a certain higher dose, but based more on how the drug is metabolized, that is the pharmacokinetics and the pharmacodynamics. So byproduct of phase 1 trial is, one, we get to know what is the dose of the drug that is safe for an individual, for a patient with cancer. And then it also gives us the recommended phase 2 dose, which is the dose that is going to be used in further testing of the drug in phase 2 trials or phase 3 trials. So next, phase 2 trials are specifically designed in a way to test the drug activity and efficacy. So phase 1 trials do not necessarily have a primary objective of activity or efficacy. As I mentioned, the objective there is tolerability, safety, and toxicity. So phase 2 trials are primarily the ones that try to assess how the drug is shrinking the tumor in a way, or acting against the tumor. And then phase 3 trials are a step beyond phase 2 trials, which is when a drug is compared to a standard of care treatment, and occasionally it could be a placebo, and we'll discuss what a placebo is in some of the questions below, in some of our discussion below. But phase 3 trials are include several hundred patients, comparison investigational agent against a placebo or a standard of care treatment. And that's when, if an investigational agent does show activity, phase 3 trials are also some of the trials are registrational trials, which help in FDA approval for a certain treatment. But in the current times where we have so many drugs that are being tested, phase 1 trials, if they show significant benefit to patients with limited side effects, there is a chance that the US Food and Drug Administration could approve those based on data from a phase 1 trial and not necessarily have to go to phase 2 or phase 3.
I'll add there that not all phase 1, 2, and 3 trials are so clear cut. There are some mixed phase 1, 2 trials. And then I can, in sort of like your overall thinking, you know, typically like phase 1 trials is sort of a small group, phase 2 might be a little bigger, and then phase 3 are, you know, typically, you know, hundreds of people. And then the last thing I'll say as a radiation oncologist is that not all interventional trials are with a drug. They might be with something like radiation, or it might be with a combination of 2 different modalities that have already maybe been tested independently, but maybe are being combined for a new evaluation to see if maybe they enhance each other. So for example, immunotherapy and radiation together, whereas previously they were evaluated independently, but there might be some added benefit at giving them at the same time. So I thought I would put that plug in there. The last thing I'll say is just that there are some interventional trials that are not drug or radiation based at all. So for example, a counseling trial or an exercise-based trial. So there are many ways of participating in clinical trials, even without, for example, taking experimental medications.
Absolutely.
Very helpful. It sounds like there are a lot of options with clinical trials.